And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome aboard. I'm National Weather Service Meteorologist Peter Chan with your Alaska Marine Weather Outlook on this Sunday, August 4th, 2024. And we start out with the sea ice on this Sunday afternoon. We have ice there along the Arctic coast, some of the pack ice a little more condensed up there north of Prudhoe Bay, east of Utqiagvik. Otherwise, a lot of open water down here along the Chukchi Sea coastline through the Bering Strait, and that should be the case. We have some very mild temperatures now with southerly flow that's working its way all along this region. Temperatures on the west side, northwest side of the mainland coastline there, up around 60 degrees with even some 70-degree readings. So we're going to see temperatures in the 70s. New exit, Prudhoe Bay toward Kaktovik here early this upcoming week, and that'll facilitate some additional late season melting of that ice. But otherwise, all being caused by a warm ridge of high pressure. This is the surface ridge with a stronger mid and upper level ridge across eastern mainland back through the Panhandle and northwest Canada. West side of the state is seeing the active weather. We have low pressure lifting out of the North Pacific, and we have another low in the northern Bering. By the time we get into Monday, that low coming out of the North Pacific will pull more moisture across Kodiak Island, the Alaska Peninsula up into Lower Cook Inlet across the southwest interior. That's going to spread northward along the west coast, including the Seward Peninsula, where a flood watch is in effect for the highlands there. Above Nome and Gullivan, you could see as much as 1.5 to 3.5 inches of rain through Wednesday there, and then areas along Kodiak Island, eastern Kenai, Prince William Sound, 3 to as much as 6 inches of rain through midweek, as the system will be a wet and mild one. Another thing is that we expect some higher surf along the west coast through at least Monday morning. By Tuesday, winds not quite as strong, but we do have in this region, you can see along the eastern Kenai down through Kodiak Island, and then along this Pacific side of the Alaska Peninsula along the Shelikof Strait. Those areas are going to get that strong southeasterly upslope flow enhancing the rainfall. Meanwhile, ridge of high pressure keeping the Panhandle warm. Very warm temperatures along the Alcan border in the 80s, even some 80s in through the Panhandle here for at least early week. But looking at the marine forecast, we'll find winds northwest to north 10 to 15 knots for the inner channels, Lynn Canal, Stevens Passage down through Dixon Entrance, waves generally a couple of feet on Monday. The outer coast, winds will be west-northwest around 10 knots south of Gustavus through off of Sitka and Craig. Swells 4 or 5 feet. Variable winds all very light around 5 knots outside there of Yakutat Bay and Cape Suckling. For Tuesday, kind of a mixed bag of winds for the inner channels. Variable winds around 5 knots, Stevens Passage, southeast to 10 knots at Lynn Canal, and then northwest to 10 knots down through Dixon Entrance with waves just a couple of feet at best. Offshore flow northwesterly 10 to 15 knots off of Sitka and Craig. More westerly coming in toward Gustavus and south of Yakutat Bay. Easterly winds to 10 knots. Over at Cape Suckling, and swells generally just running about 4 feet. Strongest winds, though, in marine concerns will be here feeding into Cook Inlet, 40-knot gales out of the east with swells upwards of 12 feet on Monday. As we go up Cook Inlet, 25-knot northeast winds there off of Anchor Point, 15-knot winds further up there in upper Cook Inlet, and then variable winds around Prince William Sound and outside of Hinchinbrook Entrance, generally around 10 knots with waves a couple of feet within Prince William Sound. And on Tuesday, we still have winds, brisk winds, but not as strong, just below gale force. Southeast winds to 30 knots there just north of Kodiak Island into the entrance of Cook Inlet with swells 9-10 feet there. Northeast winds 15 to 20 knots down upper middle Cook Inlet, waves 4 to 5 feet. East winds to 15 knots within Prince William Sound with 2 to 3 foot waves, and then 20-knot winds outside of Hinchinbrook Entrance from the east with swells of 5 to 6 feet. As we go look across Kodiak Island on Monday, winds generally east-southeast at 30 knots, 7-foot waves within Shelikof Strait, 10-footers off of Kodiak Island on the east side. And as we drop down the peninsula, winds turn back more toward the east at 15 knots with swells of 7 to 8 feet on the Pacific side, maybe 2-3 feet there on the Bering side. And for Tuesday, generally east-southeast winds, strongest to 30 knots on the east side of Kodiak Island, and then generally southeast winds 20 knots, Bristol Bay east of Chicknick, becoming variable at only around 10 knots, and we'll look at 6-foot swells off of Sandpoint and Chicknick, generally 2 to 3 foot waves from Bristol Bay extending north of Cold Bay for Tuesday. For the Aleutian chain, generally west-northwest winds 15 to 20 knots. Waves on the North Pacific side running 5 to 7 feet, and then anywhere from 3 to as high as 7-8 feet as you get out toward the western Aleutians. And for Monday, eastern Aleutians either variable or westerly winds 10 to 15 knots. Westerly as you get from Atka and Adak back out toward the western Aleutians in the 15 to 20 knot range. And for areas of the southwest coast, east winds to 25 knots within Bristol Bay on Monday, 4 or 5 foot swells there. Southeast winds to 20 knots within Kuskokwim Bay. Variable winds 10 knots out there around the Pribilovs with swells of 4 to 5 feet. And then we have southeast offshore winds of 25 knots there within Norton Sound and off the lower Yukon coast with swells of 4 to 5 feet. And then on Tuesday, look for southeast to south winds 20 knots within Bristol and Kuskokwim Bays. Still variable winds around 10 knots out there in the Pribilovs. Southeast winds 15 to as high as 20 knots, highest there within that wider expanse of Norton Sound. Look for waves 4 to 5 feet in those locations. Now as we go through the day Monday, north side of St. Lawrence, west side of the Seward Peninsula, Port Clarence and Wales, southeast winds to 25 knots, swells 5 to 7 feet. South-southeast winds 25 knots through the lower Chukchi Sea, north of the Bering Strait, swells 5 feet. Turning more southerly, 20 to 25 knots, Point Lay up through Utqiagvik with 4 to 5 foot swells, and then along the Arctic coast, winds fall off, though southerly, warmer flow coming downslope, warmer flow. Temperatures could be in the 70s along this area here east of Utqiagvik. For Monday and again on Tuesday, we're going to see southeast winds 10 to 15 knots, Kaktovik through Prudhoe Bay, maybe picking up to 20 knots around Utqiagvik, and then winds also pick up again. Cape Lisburne and Point Hope southward, generally 25 to 30 knot southeasterly winds with waves of 5 to 8 feet within the lower Chukchi Sea. And then as we go along the west side of the Seward Peninsula, southeast winds to 25 knots with waves of 7 feet, and then north winds to 15 knots there on the west side of St. Lawrence Island in the vicinity of Gamble with swells of 7 to 9 feet.